Go.
Fantastic. Sergio, do you want the handout as well?
Yes.
Fantastic. Everybody in America just wants handouts. Political commentary, right?
It is nice because you can go home and read it again, you know?
Absolutely. I try to offer something.
And if it's interesting, look up more about it.
So today is the day about death. Death in Judaism and rituals that are around it. And so, what familiarity? I want to start off by finding out what we know that's correct, what we know that we might want to work on before opening this up. So what do we know about Judaism and death rituals?
Well, I know the formal name for the major ritual is called Shiva.
Mm-hmm.
You sit Shiva.
Do you know what Shiva is in terms of that ritual?
What it means, or
what it means, what happens during it?
Yeah, I mean, you're mourning 7 days of mourning. I think it's right from Shava, means 7.
Yes.
And you're mourning for your loved ones, and you are contemplating and reflecting and eating, and really, in a lot of ways, I mean, it's like, in certain ways, it's like diversion from facing the sadness, because people are coming to you, they're giving you food, there's chatting, there's talking. It's almost there's no room to cry. It almost seems like
or maybe you'll see.
Yeah, but I've actually heard people say it really hits them like a month after.
Yeah.
And almost during the Shiva, it's like you're kind of like living sort of in a surreal world.
Yes. That's good. That's good. What else?
About Shiva?
No, what else about the process of death? What else do we know?
Well, and we know that you're supposed to say, Kaddish 11 months, so that the theory is that you are repentant for your loved one's soul, so they can go to heaven, quicker. Sort of a Kabbalistic concept that you have to live out all your bad karma before you can go up to heaven, so you're aiding that process.
So that's one rationale given to it. But I think we're done with class now. No, but that's good. It's good. Do you have any familiarities?
A little bit. You have to bury people within a certain period of time.
Right.
Yes.
And before sundown or something? Or
Not
I can't remember
sundown.
what it is.
We'll get to that.
Yeah.
So
Hasidim do that actually before sundown. I mean, before sunrise, they'll actually at night, they'll have funerals at night.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
You learn something new every day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about you? What do you know about Jonathan, right?
Yeah, I don't know much about Jewish life.
Okay, so this is Jewish death, I guess.
Oh.
Well, this is also life. So
part of life.
so there are really two categories that we're going to look at. Actually, 3. Step 1 is what happens to the person who is dead, to the body. Step 2 is the process of mourning. And step 3 of our conversation will be the process of being somebody who is comforting the mourning. So what happens, we'll look at this first. I apologize, the photocopying wasn't great. But if you look at the first page, you'll see that the last thing that we try to do, which you see, in all the Catholic movies, like, if you're in the hospital and you're Catholic and a priest shows up, this is bad. It's not usually the same idea with the rabbi, but there is this idea that if you get the chance, it's something called vidui, which we say at Yom Kippur as well, at the high holidays, that is confession. So there is an idea of just kind of getting everything off your chest. We don't have the same notions, and I don't want to get too much into afterlife ideas, because this is more a class of a practice than ideas. But we don't necessarily believe in heaven and hell. We don't really know what to believe. So some people believe in heaven and hell, or the equivalent. Some people believe in resurrection. Some people believe in reincarnation. We have a little bit of everything, because really we don't know what happens. So the vidui, the confession, isn't so that way you can be sure that you get into heaven. It's tying up loose ends in life. It's trying to clear up your soul before you die for whatever happens there. So if you have time before death, it's good to do a vidui.
Now, if I may ask, is the vidui just sins they committed against God, or also sins they committed against man?
Sins against man as well, because you're alluding to Yom Kippur, where Yom Kippur you atone for your sins, but it's a famous line in there that for sins against God, Yom Kippur atones, but for sins against man or sins against another person, only actually trying to fix that problem.
Right.
Will atone for it.
How can you sin against God and man?
Sinning against God, you can swear against God. You can say, like, God, I promise this, and then you don't follow through on it. All sorts of ways that in your relationship with God you might mess up. It could be, well, I know I'm supposed to do this because the Torah tells me so. I know I'm supposed to. If you believe that. Not everybody believes that, but I know I'm supposed to keep kosher, and I ate a piece of bacon once. And so if you believe that that's problematic, that would be a sin against God, because it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks.
If I may say, I actually faced a situation, when I was a kid, I went on this roller coaster and I was scared to death. I'm not a roller coaster guy. I remember I was making all these promises to God if he lets me have an easy ride. And I remember I didn't do any things that I promised because it was under duress. And I remember I had to ask God to forgive me for all my promises.
Yeah.
But so.
Promises under duress, not a good thing to hold to.
Yeah.
But right, so for sins against God, that's what Yom Kippur does. But for another person, God's like, you can pray to me all you want, but that won't actually solve your relational problem.
Right.
Vidui is less. I mean, the other person might be there. If you can make amends in life, it's better. But this is really just to clear. This really helps the person who's dying to clear their. I was going to say clear their palate. That's not quite the right word. To clear the slate, to make them feel ready for death to prepare them. And then the person likely will die, and ideally the last thing you say is the Shema, which is the famous creed, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Listen, O Israel, Adonai, the Lord is my God. The Lord is one. The Lord is unified. It's the ultimate statement of faith, and so the tradition is to say that before you die if you can. And then likewise, the first thing that a person is supposed to say when they hear about someone that's died are the words Baruch Dayan HaEmet, blessed be the true judge. So that even in the greatest sense of pain, we're required to bless, to find some connection that whatever's meant to be is meant to be. And sometimes that can be very troubling. Sometimes it's not, but it ties us in. And the tradition doesn't think, yes, you need to love God, but you're not permitted to get mad at God. You can be furious at God. The problem is when you're indifferent and you don't care. But the idea is to continually engage in that relationship. And so those are the traditional words that you say when somebody has died, or when you first hear about that. If you're in a synagogue and there's an announcement going out over the email listserv, the subject line will usually say Baruch Dayan HaEmet. So the first thing, so when somebody dies, the goal is to get somebody into the ground as fast as possible, to bury them. So when you wait a couple of days, it's really, you wait until the family can get there. So sometimes people will wait even longer. If they have family who lives overseas and they need to fly in. But the goal is to bury people as soon as possible to get the person back into the ground, because from the soil we were created, and so back to the soil.
If I may say, I also heard another reason that it's customary because years and years ago, when there was a lot of anti-Semitism, Jewish bodies were desecrated.
Was one thing, and
that's why they want to get into the ground as soon as possible.
It's definitely a practical concern. You're not supposed to desecrate the body in life or in death. And so yes.
Do you embalm the body?
There's no embalming. You're not allowed to desecrate the body. But you're also not allowed to slow the process of decomposition. We're not supposed to do anything that
no cremation.
Cremation you're not supposed to do. But that's becoming more of a common practice that people are doing due to environmental concerns. You're not supposed to do that. But the first thing, we'll get to the actual burial. The first thing you do is it's called tahara, which means making pure. So to restore the person to purity, in a sense, to offer that person back to God, there's a ritual washing. where the person's just cleaned from head to toe, under the fingernails by, and it's very holy work, and it's done by a group that's called the Chevra Kadisha, the holy group, where towns often will have them. Sometimes synagogues will. Sometimes there'll be people where their big Jewish deeds are to be part of this burial society. Burial society would be the other term for it, where their jobs are to prepare the bodies. And then the other thing, because one idea, sometimes there's superstition that you don't want the soul to leave, you want the soul to be watched over. Then there's also the idea of like actually protect the body so they're not desecrated. That traditionally you need somebody named a shomer, a guard. So it's somebody who's sitting with the body at all times. If you listen to the podcast, This American Life, Shalom Auslander, somebody like that, he's an author. He writes about his mischievous times being paid to be a shomer and getting high while he was doing it. Not a great example of what you should do. But the idea is that you sit with the body and read psalms to really guard the soul, guard the body, to protect them. And so this is the time where, because the goal is to get the body into the ground as fast as possible, this is a time where the loved ones are not mourning yet. You don't mourn. You don't actively focus on your own needs until you know that you've taken care of the deceased. And it's called Chesed Emet, the ultimate act of kindness, because it's the only act of kindness you can do for another person that can never be repaid, that they can never repay, which is to bury the person. And so, burial, mausoleums, mausoleums are where you put somebody essentially into a man-made cave. Those are actually okay, because you don't actually do anything to prevent the decomposition of the body. And if you look at in Abrahamic times, they were all buried in caves. The cave of Machpelah, the family plot that Abraham haggles for in the early parts of Genesis, it's a cave. So mausoleums are more kosher. Cremations happen. Not sanctioned, but they happen. Most often, the most traditional practice is to bury a person in the cemetery. Now, it's not traditional at the funeral to have the open casket, but it happens sometimes. Sometimes it'll be done separately in the room with the immediate family. It's important to check before you bury the person, just to make sure that you know who's in there. You never want to mess up.
Yeah, really.
To make sure they're not alive. No, that doesn't actually happen.
Well, sometimes people actually do come back.
Oh, yeah.
They think they're dead, and it's really like they're in a coma
Some
state
kind
or
of
something,
medical
and
issue.
medical problem, and they come back.
They had that in ancient times where I think people they were buried, but they didn't know, and they used to tie a string around their toe,
Yes.
and then there used to be a bell at the top. So if the person was still alive, they used to move their foot, and the bell used to ring, and they would know that person's still alive, and they dug that person up.
Wow, I never heard that before. That's
Yeah.
amazing.
There isn't a lot on that in the Jewish tradition, but I've heard
But it's
that
good
as
they
well.
double check. I'd hate to
Oh, that's
say
fine.
Kaddish for anti-Semite.
Well, they do
Old
say,
school, old school.
the rabbis do say that the greatest hero is somebody who makes an enemy or makes a friend of an enemy.
Wow.
So just saying on the other side of
But
that.
that's a good thing to do.
Absolutely. So, in terms of the burial, so you bury the person. You don't dress them up in their finest clothing. You don't send the person to death with anything. You bury them in it's called a shroud. It's a very, very simple white linen garment. White symbolizes what?
Purity.
Purity, and it's simple. It also protects modesty. You don't bury a person naked, but it's modest, and the only thing that you might do is bury them with a prayer shawl, with a talit. But then the tradition is to cut off the fringes, because the fringes on the talit were commanded in the Torah to wear fringes on the corners of our four-cornered garments and to look at them and be reminded of all the other commandments. So you cut them off to say that this person can no longer perform the other commandments.
Is it a kittel that they're being buried in?
It's similar to a kittel, but not quite. It's much simpler, much more coarse. And occasionally there will be soil from the land of Israel that's put in the casket as well. The caskets are supposed to be simple and wooden with some holes drilled into them, because the goal. Some people will do the more fancy ones, but as long as it's wood and enough that it doesn't prevent. You don't want the hermeneutically sealed. Is that the word? Hermetically. Sorry, hermeneutics is something different. You don't want a hermetically sealed coffin because that'll prevent the body from decomposing. But you want the body to be able to return to the earth as fast as possible. There are some places where it comes up, like in New Orleans, where it's law that you have the casket inside one of those concrete containers, which they need because otherwise you get, in light of the living dead, the water comes up and then they pop out of their coffins. Not a good idea. But they do have them where you cover the top, but the bottom can be left uncovered. It's also a requirement that unless the law is completely unethical or immoral, that we follow the law of the country that we're in. So we do the best of our abilities to fulfill the tradition. So that's in terms of the body itself. Any questions on that?
Yeah, I'm just curious, the New Orleans way, I don't understand. How is it uncovered in the bottom? Meaning where the guy is sitting on?
The goal, not the coffin itself, but the cement casement for it. Because the goal is to keep it down in the ground. So
gotcha. I understand now. So it's almost like on top, like that way. Okay.
Exactly.
That happened in Pennsylvania. What is the place? Wilkes-Barre. It had a big flood, and all these caskets started coming up and floating off. And I remember somebody had a corpse on their front porch. I mean, it was bad.
Yeah, that's kind of brutal.
Yeah, but that's probably what they're trying to avoid.
Why don't they bury them in weights or something? Floods happen though.
Right. Well, that's why there's some places where you're just not as accustomed to it, and it's a lot of added expense. So there are the places where they are buried above the water table where it makes much more sense.
To what percentage of burials would you say in Reform Judaism is done the next day?
Almost none. Usually it's 2 days in advance. Not only Reform Judaism, most liberal Judaism, or anywhere where you have family that lives all around the continent. It's just the reality of modern life today is that families typically are not immediately together.
Right.
So you could do it the next day.
Right.
But it's unlikely with family structures. You have kids in college. You have somebody who moved across for some kind of job. You have cousins that you want to have there.
What was the longest you've ever seen?
A week and a half.
Really?
Because the person died in London but wanted to be buried here, and there was family in South Africa.
Oh, wow.
And so the family in South Africa had to go to London to get the body and then bring them over here.
Okay.
That's atypical, yes.
Is there ever a feeling, I think this was from Celtic, but I'm not certain, that, they were fearful of not being buried because they were afraid a demon would take over their body and use it.
That probably appears somewhere in our literature, but it's superstition and nothing more.
Okay, so it wouldn't be common.
Not at all. You just want to protect the body and you want to prevent desecration from it, or desecration to it. You have a question?
Yes, maybe it was already talked about as I stepped out. How does that meld with modern autopsies?
That's a good question. So sometimes that's another reason to postpone it. Sometimes an autopsy needs to be done, and if for criminal procedures, you certainly need to do it. And so that's one of the things where you need to follow the laws of the state. The laws of the state insist, and it may also help to save another life. In the same way that there is a big debate over whether or not organ donation is acceptable, and I think the general consensus through the liberal movements and even in parts of Orthodox is that if your organ is going to immediately help save a life, like if it will be transplanted into another person, then donating that organ is acceptable. Well, if it's not so acceptable to donate it to science, where somebody can chop it up or put it in formaldehyde because it's not directly saving a life, and it's not like there's any shortage of those organs for scientific purposes. They have vaults and vaults, or not vaults. You probably don't keep an arm in a vault, but they have lots of these. So you're permitted to give up parts of your body if it's to save another life.
I have one at the back over here.
fantastic.
Maybe let's come and see
The
it.
safety deposit box.
Yeah, Wells Fargo.
Right. So you follow it to save a life, and you follow it to follow the laws of the state. It's a good question. So in terms of the funeral, let me make sure. Oh yeah, and so there are usually no nails in the box because they're in the coffin because nails don't decompose. And the other thing is that mourners. So moving to mourners. Mourners have Jewish responsibilities. You're obligated towards traditions and different observing, like praying 3 times a day or however long, and we treat it differently in different branches of Judaism. But somebody who's called an onan, or plural onanim, are the people who are related to the deceased, who are taking care of the body between the death and the burial. They have no other obligations, Jewishly speaking. They're just required to take care of that body. And usually this refers to immediate family, a spouse, a parent, a child, or a sibling of the deceased. They are the ones who are considered mourners who are obligated to mourn. There are others who can mourn and who can say Kaddish, but they aren't under obligation.
Only the family can mourn?
No, only the family is required to mourn. There's a ritual obligation for them to engage in that process of mourning.
In fact, if I'm correct, even at least among Orthodox, if for some reason a person can't say Kaddish for their loved one every day, they're supposed to pay someone to do it.
Well, they're not supposed to pay somebody.
If for some reason
they're supposed to ask somebody else to do it, and there are a lot of people who will do it for a fee. It's a good money maker.
Yeah.
Yes.
You pay
They're not
someone to mourn
required to
for
pay.
you?
Okay,
for that,
gotcha.
But, yes. Yes. So, from the mourning perspective, so you've made all the arrangements. What you do sometime between the funeral and the death, after Baruch Dayan Ha'imet, is to show how broken you are. And usually it ends up being done right before the funeral. Is in older days you would tear a garment. You would tear your uttermost garment. But you also don't want to cause too much financial trouble for yourself because of a death. So the custom now is to have a ribbon that you wear on your outermost garment and to tear that ribbon. And that's usually done by the mourners. And so that's usually pinned, and then you have the funeral. And the first part is the service that takes place in usually in a chapel. Sometimes it's on the graveside. And this is where you'll usually say a few psalms, and then eulogies are delivered. Some funerals are going to be 20 minutes long. Some will be 2 hours long. You know, some people speak longer. Some people have a lot to say. Sometimes it will be a rabbi or a member of the clergy who speak. Sometimes it will be family. Sometimes you'll get any kind of mix. Then what's traditional to say at the funeral is a prayer called El Malei Rachamim, which if you hear it, it'll begin usually El Malei Rachamim Shochen Ad Bolumim very mournful and sorrowful, and sometimes there'll be moments of silence. But it's a prayer before you bury the person that basically asks God to watch over this person's soul. And then you will take the person from the chapel, you'll take the person to the cemetery. Either it's a short distance or a long distance, and you have the big funeral procession. You look like you have a question.
No.
Okay. And there's no specific structure. Sometimes verses from Psalms are said as the casket is being walked. Sometimes they're pallbearers. Pallbearers are the people that hold the coffin. Sometimes it's just wheeled over in the hearse right to the side. The hearse is the Ghostbusters. You know that the Ghostbusters used a hearse as their car. Mm-hmm. They painted it white. Did you know that?
Well, no, I didn't.
Yeah, it's I guess the fancy name for hearse is the coffin mobile. But it's a car that's specially equipped. But that's the Ghostbusters car. So they take to keep the ghosts from leaving the body. It's a Ghostbusters van. I'm sorry, that's awful. But okay, so sometimes psalms will be said when they get there. Sometimes psalms will be said as or sung as the person is lowered into the ground. And so when the person is lowered into the ground, we do the last kindness that we can do, which is to bury them. It's not required that the immediate family bury the person entirely, but it is a mitzvah to really help with the burial process. And so what's tradition is that everybody does at least one shovelful. Sometimes people will do 3, sometimes people will do more than 3. But the first one you'll see, and again, this is all tradition, none of this is prescribed. They'll hold the shovel upside down. Not with the shovel part facing you, but with the blade of the shovel upside down, so it doesn't easily pick up soil, to show that while we're doing it, we're tremendously reluctant.
Can I ask you a question? Do you ever see the old movie reel of a Yiddish comedy where the guy was shoveling to bury the guy, and then as he was shoveling, he hit another mourner in his head, who then died right there and then and dropped dead. And then you have to figure out how they're going to have 2 funerals in one. And then the same thing happened a third time, where the guy was shoveling, and he hit another guy in the head, and he also dropped dead. It was from the
like
1920s Yiddish video. The video, movie reel, yeah.
So,
I always loved that you bury them, that
Yeah.
you're involved in it.
yeah.
I
What's an
can't
act of
remember
kindness?
whose funeral I went to, and I saw that, and I was so impressed. So when my dad died, I took a little bit of dirt.
It's,
Because it's like personal.
Yeah, exactly.
You're burying him, not some person from the cemetery.
So there are different traditions though, because the person from the cemetery often will be involved. I usually make my recommendations based on the number of people. How it depends on the state. Sometimes if mourners are hysterical, or and I don't mean hysterical in a judgmental way, but it can be really awful. Then they may not be in a state where they could bury them. It may also be freezing or ridiculously hot and humid outside, which in that case you don't want somebody doing the entire burial. But sometimes you do, and sometimes people want to. So sometimes we'll just say everybody who wants to puts a shovelful on. That in itself is taking part in the act of burying. I like to say that you at least cover the top of the coffin in soil, or in earth. Never say that you're using dirt, because it doesn't sound as nice. Right, you don't want to throw dirt on a person. I mean, it's all language and poetry, but it doesn't sound right. And sometimes people will do the entire burial. And then it's only after the burial that the family, and at this point it's usually only those who count as mourners, either according to what I stated, or if there's some extended families very close, or people who are unofficially in those roles. People want to mourn, you don't stop them from mourning, but they say Kaddish. And Kaddish is a prayer that isn't only for mourning, there are variations on it. And it doesn't say anything about death. It just blesses God over and over and over again. And some people say it's to help repent for the soul. I think that ultimately it's to honor that person's memory by doing blessings in this world. Because that person, as we knew from cutting off the tzitzit, that because they can't do commandments, they can no longer do blessings. And so how do you honor a person's memory? By carrying forth their flame, by doing in their name what they can no longer do. And so the first thing that you do is you do blessing, you bring blessing, and you give blessing, to make sure that this world doesn't lack from there as much. The world is in a sense comforted, and God is in a sense comforted from that. And so that's why we say Kaddish. And then usually from there, the mourners those who have come from the funeral, but their job is also there to comfort the mourners. When you go to a Jewish funeral, you are not only there to remember the person who died, you are there to comfort those who are mourning. So that you'll usually line up in 2 rows up to the Kohen, and the mourners will go through. And usually then traditional words of mourning are offered, which are listed in here, which the Hebrew is Hamakom Yinachem Etchem B'toch She'ach Avalei Tzion V'Yerushalayim. And that means Hamakom, which literally means the place, is one name for God from the rabbis. That God is in this place. God is in every place. So may God grant you comfort along with those mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. Because we are forever mourning Zion and Jerusalem until it's built from a messianic perspective, until the next stage comes of existence. Those are the words offered. And then, let me make sure I'm not missing anything. And after this, when the funeral is over, this is when the attention gets focused to them. This is when the period of Shiva happens, which is the first week after mourning. I'll get to that in a second. But there's you. Oh, and when you're leaving the cemetery, and this counts. When you're Jewish, it's standard to wash your hands, ritually washing. Some cemeteries will have fountains that have been put there. I usually bring a bottle of water just in case, because it's a matter of ritual purity. The death is considered impure. It's not bad. It's just a matter of a heightened level of godliness versus a regular level of godliness versus a little bit of absence. You've got purity, which is the heightened level. You've just got normal everyday life, and then the cemetery brings you a little bit lower. And so it's important to wash your hands just by pouring water on each hand. You don't say a blessing for that one, that you do before Shabbat dinner. Washing your hands is the process to kind of cleanse yourself and get ready. And then the traditional thing is, or while that's happening, a mourner's home will be prepared, which means that all the mirrors will be covered, which not everybody does, but that's what I'm offering is what's traditionally done. And their house is usually stocked with food. The mirrors are covered because you really shouldn't be caring about your appearance when you're mourning. And so they'll come home for that first meal, which is called the Seudat Havra'ah, which is Seudah is a meal, and Havra'ah, Briut, which is the same root as health. So it's literally the meal that's supposed to bring them back to life. And certain traditional foods include hard-boiled eggs and lentils because it's there to remind us of the circle of life. So that's what happens, and it's okay to eat when you go to a house of mourning. The food isn't only for the mourner. Usually people have so much food that they're given because communities really come through that you should. It's also traditional not to go to a house of mourning empty-handed. They usually bring food with you. And word to the wise, if you ever do it, often the assumption is, well, I'll just bring a coffee cake, it'll be sweet. Usually it's good to check out their dietary restraints, if they keep kosher, if they're vegetarian. But it's always good to bring substantial food that will actually give them health rather than just sweetness. But so in terms of the mourning period, let's go to, it says 85 at the bottom. It's a nice little rubric. It says mourning stages. Actually, Sergio?
Yes, sir.
Do you have 3 pens that we might use?
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you. Because I think this is actually a pretty great chart. Thank you, sir.
Mm-hmm.
I think we actually only need 2 now, so this becomes one. Thank you. I'm good. This is all in my head. So you see the different stages of mourning. So Shiva, which comes from the, as Robert, right? Mm-hmm. As Robert said, it comes from the word 7, or Shiva, which means 7. That is the most acute period of mourning, which are the 7 days following death. Shloshim, which includes the period of Shiva, are the 30 days following death. Shloshim is literally the number 30. Shiva is typically cut off for, you don't observe Shiva on Shabbat, on the Sabbath, and you don't observe Shiva on festivals. In a traditional household, or in traditional Judaism, Shiva is entirely ended at the festivals, that you're not supposed to let mourning come in the way of the joy of these special days. I don't think we should do Shiva on festivals, and we certainly don't on Shabbat, but sometimes you see it that we pick up Shiva again after the festivals, because the mourning period is very important. And also, not everybody chooses to do the intensive mourning period for 7 days. I highly recommend it, because I think it's important. But you have Shloshim, and then you have Shana, which means year. You may know the Rosh Hashanah greeting, or Rosh Hashanah, the holiday Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah means head of the year, New Year. And Shana Tova means a good year, which is the traditional greeting. So Shana is actually, as you said, not a full year, but the 11 months following death. And then the Yortzeit really is the anniversary of death, and that you continue to mark year after year. And so, in terms of no responsibilities, when is that?
Before the funeral.
Exactly. No responsibilities before the funeral for the mourner. Food is brought to the mourners when?
Shiva.
So during Shiva and before the funeral, the people take care of mourners during that time. Mourners stay at home for how long?
Shiva.
Exactly. So, as a mourner, you are home receiving guests. but you're not actually taking care of guests. It's more that you are at home and people are coming in to offer comfort or whatever you need. People are taking care of you. You just mourn and do what you need to do, but you're not supposed to go back to work during the time of Shiva. And it's at Shloshim that you begin to go back to work. Shloshim is the point where you're mourning, but you're re-entering life a little bit in that month. When is before that, daily minyan at home. If you go there, minyan is having at least 10 people so you can pray. The daily, and really say Kaddish, the daily minyan at home typically happens during Shiva as well. After that, you're expected to go to synagogue because you can leave your house. So traditionally, you're supposed to say Kaddish every day for that first year of mourning, right? But then you'll go to synagogue often to do that. Let's see. So Kaddish, Kaddish is said all through Shana. You don't need to say daily Kaddish after Shana, but you need to say, but you'll say Kaddish at the Yartzeit, which is the anniversary of Death of God. Is this a lot to take in, or is this making sense?
It makes sense.
Yeah, I found this rubric to be very helpful. Because you're in a period of mourning, while Shloshim you're starting to go back to work, you typically avoid parties. You avoid music and dancing and that kind of celebration.
For how long?
Through Shloshim.
Okay.
And then it's debatable whether you go to parties through the Shana, through the year. It's dependent on how you feel. The one thing is you're never supposed to skip a wedding for a funeral, or if you're in mourning. But it may be that you go to the wedding ceremony, but then you don't stay for the dancing. Because the wedding is really moving forward with life, and you're not supposed to, with somebody else's life, and you're not, or even your own. If you are supposed, it's really tough if somebody that you love dies and you're getting married that week. But you're never, but wedding is really that sacred time of moving into the next stage of life, so you don't miss that. God forbid it ever happens that you're getting married and somebody close to you dies that week. So no parties in the first section. But a time to mourn, traditionally from a Jewish standpoint, the only time you don't really officially mourn is after Shana. But you mourn on the Yortzeit. Oh yeah, and you don't mourn before the funeral either. You mourn on Shiva through Shana. Shiva Shloshim Shana. That is the time for mourning. And so what I find really beautiful about this system is that it really forces you, in a sense, to take the time to be in your deepest stages of grief. It allows you that time. And we'll talk about people coming in and out once we go over etiquette for the person visiting the Shiva house. And the Shiva house is the mourner's house where they are receiving people. But it has the acute mourning period. And then it has, well, we need to get you back into life, but you're still going to be mourning. There's still changes. And then it takes you through a year of mourning because you really need a full year before the change sets in. You need to experience the holiday. Every time you experience a holiday without the person there, you experience a Christmas, and it's the first time if your father died since Christmas, or since the last one, the first one without him is going to be so hard. Any of the Jewish holidays, anything. I mean, in any culture. And so this really takes note of that. And then there's also the idea with the Yortzeit that you can never forget. And that mourning, while you may think about a person, you may have these feelings of intense sorrow less and less frequently. When you do have them, they're just as intense. It doesn't stop hurting. And so there's an allowance for mourning, and there's also 3 times a year that we actually, four times a year that we say Yizkor, which is a special service where we remember our loved ones for whom we're mourning. Yizkor means to remember. We do it at the high holidays, and then we do it at Sukkot, Pesach, and Shavuot. They're the 3 pilgrimage festivals. So you have different times through the year where really you're going to be a mourner for life, because you are a mourner for life, but there's smaller doses. Any questions on the process of mourning?
You know, this thing, there's these stages of
grief?
Yeah. And
Kubler-Ross.
yes. Did the Jewish faith have this already into the
We've
thing?
had this since rabbinic times, since
And
early in the early hundreds.
Right. And so
if not
specifically to help the person move from sorrow and anger, and they acknowledge the anger all along in all this.
Oh yeah.
That is beautiful. That's
Oh, yeah.
awesome.
Thank you. I like my
This
tradition.
is very beautiful. Your religion is very beautiful.
It's
I really like it.
absolutely. So the big question, which was actually the inspiration for this class by the person who could not be here today. Denise and Brian couldn't be here because it's their son's playing in a basketball game tonight. I think a finals game. So when you're watching this, Brian and Denise, I hope Nick won or at least did well. But if not, that's okay too. We still like him. So this is an instruction for how to visit a Shiva house. So it can be very awkward going in because you never know what to say to somebody who's in pain. It's like when you go to a hospital and somebody's sick. How you doing? Right? You don't say that. And same thing, like don't ask somebody who's mourning how they're doing because, you know.
You don't want to do what Ed Koch did.
What did he do?
He used to say, tell everyone, how you doing? When he meets everyone in the streets. It's not what you want to do.
How's it hanging?
Shiva house.
You know, I'm doing okay. The person died. I'm really sad. I've got bags under my eyes, but all things considered, I'm doing okay. Like, right. So here are the traditions that you'll see. Do you want to take turns reading the bullet points?
Yeah. No one comes to a Shiva house without bringing some food. This lets you head to the kitchen and talk to other people there.
That's just something you do. People tend, you know, then in Newfoundland actually they took this and they started calling their parties kitchen parties because it's the understanding that when you go to somebody's house for dinner, typically you end up congregating in the kitchen while somebody's finishing up the dinner. So the same with the Shiva house, there will be lots of people in the kitchen or the dining room or wherever the food is. So it gives you an entry that makes it a little bit more comfortable for you, and it also means you're taking care of the mourner very actively. Jonathan, do you want to take the next point?
Usually the door to the house of the mourning is left open so that no one needs to ring a bell or knock. This also means that the mourners do not have to act as hosts, opening the door and welcoming people.
That's why I corrected myself before, saying that the mourners are not receiving guests. They're receiving comforters, but they are there, and it's a comforter's job to really come in. And so you leave the door unlocked because it really needs to be so people can come in and out to help the mourners, and that's all. The mourners should not have to worry about who's coming in and out of the house. Typically, they'll lock the house when they don't want people there. And often you'll ask, what time will you receive people? So they might say, you know, between 4 and 9 and at lunchtime, but I'm going to take a break in the afternoon because it is an exhausting process. Okay, so do you want to take the next point?
Sometimes you'll find a row of shoes outside the door. This means you take yours off too.
Self-evident, right? Look for things to respect the space. Especially some people like me are neat freaks or germaphobes, and if you're mourning, it's one thing for my face to be dirty, but I don't want mud all over my floor, right? No, it's custom and politeness. You want to go ahead with the next one?
You need not say anything to the mourners, just being there is enough. If you have to do something, a handshake or hug is great.
It may feel awkward, but the most important thing is that you are present. That you are available, and it may be, actually that's the next point, but it's important that they know that you care about them, that you're there. But often trying to come up with awkward conversation is less about the mourner and more about your own discomfort with the silence and with not knowing what to say. And you have to hang your discomfort up at the door with your shoes in hand, because it's not about you at all. And often people forget that. It's easy to forget that. Because when you're feeling awkward, you feel awkward. But to act upon that awkwardness is a selfish act in this context.
Then nobody talks there, or?
Oh no, people talk. We'll get to the next.
Yeah.
But don't make small talk, and usually take the lead from the mourner or from what's already going on. Yeah. Jonathan, do you want to pick up the next?
Follow the mood. If people are sitting quietly, sit quietly. If people are telling stories and memories about the person who died, perhaps you can tell one. This is not a time to entertain. This is just the time to be there.
So what you were saying. You talk about things if that's what people are inclined to do. Shiva is an excellent time for sharing memories of the person who died. The idea is to really bring up thoughts and to really have this time to say goodbye, in a sense, to come to terms. You don't necessarily, but it's a good time for that. Sometimes people will need to talk about other things. So if I try to encourage that we make sure we talk about the person who's died, because we really need that for the process. Sometimes they just need to not talk. And so the best thing to do is take that person's lead. Sometimes if you know that might help, you could ask a person, like if you're just sitting there and it's just the two of you and it looks like they're waiting for you to say something, you might ask, so maybe could you tell me a story about so-and-so? Along that theme.
That feels good. I mean, I've been to funerals where they do that.
Yeah.
And they'll tell stories, funny stories about the person. Everybody will end up laughing like crazy.
Oh, yeah.
But do you remember that, the warmth that in your heart about that
Exactly.
person comes out?
Exactly.
It's really nice.
It's good. And then there may be a service when there's there, religious service, so the person can say Kaddish. So just join in. Be present, grab a prayer book, and say Amen when everybody else is saying Amen. And then, like coming in, when you're ready to leave, go. They don't need to see you off. You've done the right thing. And over those 7 days, if you can only make it once, that's fine. If you can go 5 times, good too. It's good. There's no limit on your comforting them. Just you do what you can. But one thing that's there also is it's often a tradition to give to tzedakah, make a charitable donation somewhere in honor of the memory of the deceased. So, let's say your friend's aunt died. That you could say, like, in honor, I'm giving money to the synagogue or to the American Cancer Society because she died of cancer. Something meaningful, and it could be a small token donation, but that's often a nice way to do it. Then the last step, because actually we're running a little bit over with class, is that at the yard site of a person after the year, there's usually an unveiling, or that's when the tombstone is set up at the cemetery. This is usually just a private affair with the family. Sometimes they'll bring in more people, but it's where you unveil the tombstone, and you'll see that while some people do flowers, it's not Jewish tradition to put flowers on the grave. It's usually a Jewish tradition to put a stone on the grave, or a pebble. Which, you never think about it, but often you need to bring pebbles with you to the cemetery, because there are never enough stones everywhere. But I think part of the idea of that, well, it's a marker that you were there. It's a marker that isn't kind of putting life just to die in there, because dead flowers are depressing. But it's also that you're continually helping in the act of burying and keeping them buried by putting the stone there. So people, and then you can visit the cemetery wherever you want. Sometimes also people will light a candle that burns for 24 hours, a Yortzeit candle. And there's some graves in Jewish cemeteries where there's a little box that can hold a candle. And, well, if you see the little box, it's to protect the candle from the wind so they can keep the candle. Not everybody does the candle by the stone, but some people do. That is Jewish mourning and death cycles in a nutshell.
That's beautiful.
Thank you. Any quick questions?
No. I like it that you have a ritual so everybody knows what to do.
Yeah. Ritual is a tremendous guide for the life cycles. They help walk us through, they help find meaning, and sometimes it just helps to have instructions on what to